So I was just thinking about why certain therapies, cognitive behavioral therapies, and also things like ABA therapy do not function. Like we hear a lot of people talk about how certain things were just like too much and da 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 da. Such as planned ignoring, which is one of the big ones that I'm against because for some of us, our nervous system is completely different than everyone else's. And the moment you teach parents who are also neurodivergent, possibly undiagnosed neurodivergent, that don't want to get their children diagnosed, because that was the big thing in our house. My mom did not want us to be diagnosed with these conditions. So when my twin brother, they forced him to be diagnosed and put him in special classes because of how disruptive he was placed on medications, which then made my mom's medical trauma even worse, seeing how these medications turned her son into a zombie and so on and so forth, leaving me further without care. So I think the biggest thing with ABA therapy, or even any form of cognitive behavioral therapy, or I don't remember what the other one is, it's emotional, something like that. Any form of nervous system regulation when it comes to dysregulated nervous systems or perceived dysregulated nervous systems, the moment you give a parent these instructions and you have no way of monitoring if they are completing the instructions at home, it's basically like giving a kid homework. You don't see results because they're not doing the homework. The only time they're using punishment and planned ignoring is when they don't want to deal with their child. But my mom never did anything that my dad never did anything that the therapist recommended at home. We never got any continuance of care at home. So, and this is the big problem I'm struggling with, accepting some of the helps offered after I've already been harmed by independent living solutions, because Adult Protective Services is acting the same way CPS is acting. Like, you have no responsibility or accountability when it comes once you've placed that person into that care. So the harm that foster care parents, foster care institutions, or actual biological parents do, they're no longer your responsibility once they have proved the legal responsibility, which is housing, food, and clothes. Emotional stability, not a problem, even though it's creating criminals, it's creating sick people, whether it's mentally ill people or physically ill people or both. The struggle is real with this because a lot of parents get upset when they're told that they need to take responsibility for these actions. You chose to have that child. That child did not choose to be here, as much as spirituality wants to convince you in adulthood so that you can overcome your childhood trauma. That's all it is. It's reverse psychology that spiritualists are using by telling you, hey, you planned it out for yourself. You made the script. You totally planned this out for yourself. Yes, some of those ideas of afterlife are beautiful. They're easy to believe in because we want to believe that, after all this unplanned chaos that we have no control over, we get to have some control. It's the same idea that all of our suffering will be done when we die because we're going to paradise. They just switched it up, repackaged it, and resent it out into the world, which is very comforting. I'm not going against the comfort that provides. It's the same comfort that faith and religion provide. But you don't need to gaslight yourself in order to do that. You did not choose to be treated the way you were treated by your parents, but you do get the opportunity to choose how you heal from that treatment. This is why I say, when you go to any form of education, take what works for you to have a better quality of life, to be a more functional person, because this world is chaotic. I've actually had parents tell me when I was working with autistic children, it's not fair that you're saying this to me. Neither is it for your child. It's not fair to them. Well, it's just not fair that, I've done everything, and I've heard this from several parents. I've done everything right, and I still have a sick child. It's not your child's fault either. So why are you taking it out on them? If your nervous system is dysregulated, how are you going to? Because I learn from mirroring people. It's why people think that I don't have my own personality. But when I exhibit my own personality, People don't like my personality. I don't just get rejected, I get mistreated, bullied, and oftentimes physically harmed because of how childish I can be. No matter how intelligent you are, your personality is your personality. And there's a difference between childishness or childlike wonder and, like pranking people. That's not childish. I do call that childish when it's in boys because that's how it's perceived in boys, but that's not childish either. Within your own friends groups, all of these things are okay, but out in the world, they're not. So pretending like they are, you're gaslighting that child. Now we have the other parents that say, well, they're not going to have those accommodations once yes, they will. I had accommodations for work even when I was a caregiver. Once they realized, hey, she doesn't think this way, we have to give her the instructions differently. That's how it was done. And I worked better in a facility than I ever did in independent living homes, because the same flaws that I'm seeing now that I need to be in independent living is the same flaws I saw before. Everybody suffers when you have one client or one patient that is fucked up and you chose to put them there. But now moving them has become impossible unless they do anything to physically harm another resident. Then you can actually enact on it, give chemical restraints, and put them into an institution or a different living setting. But it takes them actually behaving that way before you're allowed to do that. And oftentimes it takes several fucked up caregivers before the client or patient gets to that point. However, if what is triggering that behavior gets addressed, oftentimes that doesn't happen. Because some of those residents that I worked with didn't exhibit any of those behaviors when I was there. It was only with specific caregivers. But once you have been labeled a certain way, it doesn't matter if you're being abused. When you speak about it, you're ignored. So the same issues I'm having, and in therapy, they're like, well, who's saying this? Because unfortunately, I still struggle a lot when I'm having flashbacks, and I speak about it. Doctors, nurses, even social workers or people around me, they're like, well, who's saying, like thinking that people are saying that to me now. No, oftentimes when I'm talking about it, I talk about the past and the present as if they were one, because for me they are. When I'm having those flashbacks, the past and the present are one. Those situations are one. I have to process them as one, because I have to figure out why it was triggered in the present moment and what my nervous system is trying to warn me about. Is it a logical, reasonable warning? Should I logically be afraid of the situation because I have an experience of it? Or is this an illogical fear that I need to address because now my flashbacks are starting to fuck with my life? I've worked really hard for this for over 6 years. When I asked professionals for help telling the difference between my autistic meltdowns and my flashbacks, I was trying to decipher the difference between childhood cognitive dysfunction and adult cognitive dysfunction. And what I'm realizing is that professionals aren't going to be able to tell. I'm the only one who can tell. And their disbelief in an adult with as gifted as I was educationally to actually admit that I have autism. However, it's easy to see the ADHD because when I'm stressed out, I exhibit more symptoms of ADHD. But when I am in my space and allowed to be myself, I exhibit more symptoms of OCD because I like the organization. The disorganization is what actually caused the OCD, where I'd get obsessed with things being organized a whole. Literally, my autism is the reason that I was abused by my family members. The things that I exhibit that around my autistic traits are the main reasons I was bullied and harmed by family members, not just my immediate family members. This is why the diagnosis is important, whether your children are young or the person is an adult. This is why, because it gives us a better understanding. The more I go to these groups and I see the different forms of autism, the more I'm able to accept myself and see that I was doing everything right. I was literally doing everything right. Like literally right now, everything that I'm practicing in therapy is literally just reminding me of everything that I have learned from speech pathology, from occupational therapy, and from physical therapy since I was in first grade. which makes me very proud, because it's meant that all of those therapies, even though I complain about them because it's a pain in the ass, have made it so that my symptoms were minimal, and I was a low support needs person up until this point, which means that the therapies do work. As much as we want to complain about them, if you're doing them, they do work. Yes, the older you get, the slower they are. But this is why insurances need to guarantee that a child that gets placed in speech therapy, occupational or physical therapy, has access to that for the rest of their life. Because it matters. Because I lose my ability to talk a lot, and it's not just because of autism or dyslexia or even my stuttering problems that I have when I'm super stressed. It is also because of the fact that I've had a lot of neck sprains. It's also because I have frequent migraines that are weakening my entire left side. It is because my migraines are triggering aphasia, so the brain reboots every time it's doing that. It is because my brain is always trying to form new neural pathways, because the neural pathways that I'm using are not functioning at optimal level. So maintenance therapy is important. And I understand insurances just want to see that the person is progressing, and then let's get them out of there because it's going to cost us money. But in the long run, medicating people, you guys are seeing all the harm that SSRIs have done. But you are still trying to prescribe these medications to children while they're still with dysregulated parents. You can't have it both ways. You either provide the support that the parent needs so that they can be the parent that the child needs, or you support the child in all of their needs, plus the needs that now develop because of the psychological and emotional damage that some of these parents do to their children, because they themselves cannot admit that they have issues they got to deal with, and that their issues are preventing their children from getting proper medical care or education, because these parents also limit their children's education and their access to that education. I'm saying it from personal experience. That's the ugly truth about the topics that you guys are bringing up right now, that Medicare is doing so many cuts. That is what you guys are missing. My story is the aftermath of ABA therapy without actual consistency and also oversight over the parents actually completing the therapies at home. And unfortunately, I hate saying this because monitoring is such a big thing, but when it gets to the point that there is suspected abuse and the foster care system has already taken the parents, you guys are able to monitor now to make sure that the parents are doing the homework at home. You guys have that. The court can legally say, you know what, for the safety of this child, we want a camera in the living space and in the child's bedroom. You can't force the parents to give you access to their bedroom, bathrooms, or anything like that. But at least the living space and the living room you can. Unfortunately, some of these parents do need that level of monitoring, or they need their children taken from them. Because a woman that is always putting men in front of her children, or a woman that is not healthy enough to see the unhealthy habits that she has that harm her children, or a man who does these things, it doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman, or a family, aunties and everything that do these things because sometimes it's familiar. That's what I tried to explain, and I've said it so many times in my therapy appointments. I would feel safe if I knew that if I got worse, I'm not going to be sent back to my family. I think I could focus on my future if I knew I wasn't going to be sent to my family, because I've seen what they do to disabled people and how they break their spirit. My cousin's always getting called estúpido, pendejo, and all this stuff. And then they make him feel bad about him speaking up about how terrible. And just because he's already in his 60s, people think they can still be abusive because his 80-year-old mom is the one who's abusing him. And apparently it's okay that she's been doing this for 40, 50 years. It's not okay. It was just the siblings not wanting to take this person away from the mother who's been harming him for a long time. And that's just one example of the many examples in my family of ignorance that has harmed neurodivergent individuals, whether it was cognitive neurodivergence or like childhood cognitive behavioral neurodivergence or abuse and trauma. And some of them, like that particular cousin that I'm talking about, he ended up with meningitis when he was a kid. So his brain damage is from meningitis. But this is what I'm saying. This it's not okay. Because to not deal with his shit, she's always trying, like, Haldol is the only thing that works for his seizures. No, it fucking isn't. Haldol is just the easiest way for you to control him when he's getting on your nerves. But he's getting on your nerves because you're not letting him regulate his nervous system. Because you are the person, the caregiver is the one dysregulating them. And the caregiver is the one saying he's oppositionally defiant and shit like that. But it's also the family's fault for leaving one person to be the caregiver of a person who has seizures and who needs constant care. That's also the family's fault. And that's why people like me that speak up, they become the enemy of the family, because we're speaking up about these things. Multiple family members last year told me to shut up about the family. Why? Who does it protect? Because it doesn't protect him. It doesn't protect me. It doesn't protect any of the disabled people living under these consequences of these familiar cycles that we refuse to look at. But it's not just my family, it's the system as a whole, is what I'm saying. Because even in caregiving facilities, therein lays the problem. Because I reported that particular caregiving facility for the shit that was going on. But this is what I'm saying, that until you guys are willing, like, I get that whole thing. As long as you have a mental health condition, we can just kind of slop everybody together so they all learn from different mental health conditions. But there's different levels. And if you put somebody with a hypersensitive nervous system and who has sensory problems, like let's say they have sensory problems with sight, smell, and audio, which is my issue. You put a highly sensitive person in a room with people who need to vocally stim, who have trouble with hygiene, and who need bright lights because they themselves are having eyeball issues and they need the bright lights to be able to see. What do you think is going to happen to the hypersensitive person? And when that hypersensitive person starts to exhibit behavioral issues, you don't change the lighting, you don't turn down the sound, and you most certainly, you tell them, hey, because it's peer-to-peer, you got to let your peers know that their smell is bothering you. But then the peer, because they're not in a good mental state, then they get upset and they think, hey, you know what? You don't understand my trauma of why I can't take a shower. I do understand your trauma, but you not taking a shower is triggering my migraine. So where is the line? And that's not just, I've experienced this with multiple people. It's the main reason me and my twin brother would have trouble. And I was taught to understand others. And that's what I was telling my friend this morning. All of my therapy, all of my speech therapy since I was a little girl has taught me how to be understanding to others, which has left my needs unattended. But now that I'm standing up for my needs, people are telling, oh no, that's wrong because you have to be sensitive to their needs. I am being sensitive to their needs. I am putting my needs around sound and light aside. Can you make the effort of putting your hygiene issues aside when you're around me? Because if we can't find that middle ground and that compromise, and I'm going to have to be in pain because of all these different things, and you can't even bring one thing down for me, then it's not an accommodation or an inclusive environment. So you're setting up these clients for failure. Yes, eventually they might get to that point. We might build a resilience to be able to tolerate more sound, more light, oftentimes not smell. Oftentimes perfumes and pungent smells are going to be too much. And everyone's like, well, just wear a mask. Cool. I'll just wear a mask, but I've been passing out. How do we accomplish that? Because now my health again is being detrimentally affected by the solutions that you give me to be part of these day programs. And the issue is that a lot of young people are now going through this because they're canaries in the coal mine. Their bodies are too maybe 3 generations of this same, because my mom had a lot of the heat intolerance and headache issues that she started just behaving differently and ignoring life altogether after her stroke. But she had all of these signs, meaning she knew that it wasn't good for the nervous system to be everything, to do everything that I was taught to do to survive. But you guys have normalized it, because survival, even if it's affecting our health, is normalized, even though it's bringing up the medical debt in the United States. Don't bag on ABA therapy. Yes, some of the things in ABA therapy, but if you're a parent, a conscious parent, you're going to be able to say, that doesn't work for my child. I'm not going to plan ignore my child because he's got a different nervous system, and I'm going to treat them differently. That's your job. To try the things that you're being told and see what works for your child, so that every time you have a meeting, you can come to the meeting. Like when we go to physical therapy, hey, I have these notes for you. This is where I'm struggling with the exercises. How can we modify the exercises for me? But a lot of parents that have children in all of these therapies, like my parents, thought they didn't need to be actively involved in it. Do you see where I'm going with the issue here? The parent needs to be treated as much as the adult, the child. The adult needs to be treated as much as the child. If you have a child that is in these therapies, it's very likely that you have parents that should have been in these therapies. Ask them if they were in these therapies. If they were not in these therapies, then the first thing you need to do is teach the parents. Like, they need to be actively involved in the therapies so that they could learn. Or at least videotape your therapies with these children so you can show the parents, so that they can mirror you. Because a lot of us who are neurodivergent struggle with interpersonal relationships because we mirror. That's all we know how to do. Like, if it was up to me and you can't have deep conversations, I'm not going to be very close to you at all. I'm sorry, but if all our conversations are surface, how are you doing conversations, eventually I'm just going to. But that's not what society taught me. So now I feel guilty when I can't be a good friend and present myself in those ways. And there's a lot of other reasoning around that, and I'm working through it in therapy. However, you need to understand that a lot of the things you guys are trying to dismantle today exist because of poor parenting and the fact that the laws don't allow it to be. But you don't want the laws to get that extreme. Why do we need the laws and oversight to get that extreme? That's how more people get harmed in the process of either proving or disproving things, to prove or disprove fraud, and so on and so forth. Give your children a real opportunity to thrive. If you actually want a future for your child, don't have your child fully depend on you. Build a community around your child. That is the most important thing, building a community around your child. Leaving your own fucking adult pride and setting aside your shit and actually building a community. Because the reason my mom, I believe, the reason my mom didn't like being a part of a community was because she didn't like being told that she was doing shit wrong. Because every time they told her to take us to therapy, we stopped seeing those family members for weeks, months, even years. That's isolation. That's coercive control. So a lot of these things that we normalize as children, they're abusive, and we have to learn it as adults. So really stop bagging on the therapies themselves and start actually seeing how many people are actually doing the work when it comes to their children. Okay? I love you and have a great day.